What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Flex Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Raybon of the Action Network and Fantasy Labs, and I'm joined by one of the top rankers in the game, one of the most accurate in the biz, the odds maker, Sean Kerner. Sean, what's going on?
What's up, and happy belated B-Day to your puppy, Kelly.
Thank you.
I saw the pictures, very cute.
Appreciate you. Yeah, she had fun. She
nice.
Just likes to run around and hang out with some other dogs. So that was cool. But
Nice.
Appreciate that. And in this episode, we're going to break down fantasy tight ends. And it's an interesting year for tight ends. Travis Kelce, not the consensus number one, I think, is pretty noteworthy. So we'll go through the top 12, talk about anybody outside, more late round guys that we like as well. And Sean, I just want to ask you before we go player by player, in general, what has your tight end strategy been for this season, and how are you prioritizing tight end relative to quarterback?
Yeah, it's very interesting this year. As you alluded to, Travis Kelce isn't the consensus tight end one for what seems like almost a decade now. So that's interesting in itself. I'm finding, tight end, people usually wait a couple rounds before they take the first tight end. And I think part of that is just due to, I would say, like tight ends 3 through 8, like that whole tier is pretty interchangeable. I think it's up for debate which, 4 or 5 tight ends should be the tight end 3. So I think it kind of allows you to wait at tight end and kind of let, one of those guys kind of fall to you. So I found it's something that if I'm able to get a Kelce or Laporta, I usually do it. I usually let somebody else take the first tight end off the board, and then I usually take Laporta or Kelce shortly after if I want to attack tight end early. But again, we'll talk about some of these guys in the tight end 3 to tight end 8 range. I think that's probably the sweet spot. And then after that, you probably want a tight end in most formats by the time the top 8 are off the board, and then there might be some flyers later on. But that's kind of how my draft strategy has been setting up this summer.
So would you say it's fair to say you are prioritizing tight end a little more heavily than quarterback in terms of the onesie position?
Yeah,
right.
I think that's always kind of how I've approached it. And it's kind of weird. Usually in most years, the tight end 4 to 8 range is kind of the dead zone. I think this year that's kind of the sweet spot. So that's kind of where it's changed. Whereas I was always trying to grab one of the top 4 tight ends.
Right.
This year, I would say between 4 and 8 is my sweet spot. Obviously loving to get one of the top 4 tight ends, but that's kind of how it's been setting up. But yeah, I definitely prioritize. I think it's going to still offer you a bigger edge than quarterback. I think quarterback's pretty deep when you're looking at the top 14 or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Tight end, it's usually going to fall off a cliff somewhere where you're just kind of taking, you're just throwing darts.
Yeah.
And it definitely is, you don't want to be left out to dry if you want a starting tight end. So we'll definitely talk through all of that. Let's start out with Sam Laporta because he's, if you don't have Kelce number one, it's because of Laporta, who goes off for 86 catches, 889 yards, 10 scores as a rookie. I guess my first question is, do you think he should be ranked over Kelce? Or do you think, kind of relying on those 10 touchdowns to grow? Because he only averaged, about 10 yards a catch. The touchdowns, were a little bit outlying, not for that offense, but just in general. So how do you kind of view Laporta here, heading into year 2?
Yeah, so I think he should be ranked number 1, although barely. I have them a point separating each other, but I do like Laporta. I mean, I was very high on him last year. I just loved his landing spot in Detroit. So I wasn't surprised he had a good season, but I was definitely shocked that he led the position in points as a rookie. So it's just scary to think how he could be even better in year 2. Whereas Travis Kelce, he's going the other direction, where last year he really did start to show, signs of slowing down, and will be 34. So I think Laporta should be the first tight end off the board. But like I said, I kind of like other people making that decision for me. Mm-hmm. So if someone takes Laporta or Kelce first off the board, the other one should go very shortly after, if not, literally the next pick. So that's why, sometimes you can get, Laporta is taken and then Kelce goes 6 or 7 picks later, I think that's a great spot to get Kelce. But as of now, I would say Laporta has the better chances of, finishing as the tight end 1 overall. I just like his upside. So if you're really taking shot on a tight end in the early rounds, I hate to say it because, I've had Kelce ranked tight end number 1 for years now. But I think this year I would definitely go Laporta.
Yeah, I have him. I think I still have Kelce a little bit ahead. It's I do expect that Chiefs offense as a whole to improve with, just the weapons they have on the outside, which, would help everyone involved. But yeah, it's really close. And I think the only other time it's been that close, I think Mark Andrews and Kelce had a year or two in there where they were kind of vying for that top spot recently, but that's about it. Kelce mentioned the age, entering his age 35 season. He turns 35 on October 5th. So, he's getting up there, did snap a streak of 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons last year, only 984 yards, 5 scores, 93 catches. Does have more target competition with Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, even if Rashee Rice misses time. But that could also, you could see that Chief offense kind of go back to being among the most productive pass offenses in the league, which it really wasn't last year. It was more mediocre. So talk to me about Kelce. We already started kind of getting into it, but how are you approaching Kelce this year?
Yeah, so last year, Laporta finished as the tight end 1 overall, but if you look at points per game, Laporta and Kelce were tied. And, Kelce missed week 1 with that knee injury, and you just have to wonder if that knee injury just lingered a little bit longer and he was playing through it, and maybe we're underrating Kelce just based on last season's stats. Yeah. And like you mentioned, having guys like Marquise Brown or Xavier Worthy really stretching the defense downfield, maybe that does open things up for Kelce over the middle. So he could bounce back and finish as the tight end 1 overall this year. That's why, again, I have them separated by a point. We're really splitting hairs here. I still like Laporta's upside just based on age curves and where they are in terms of their career. But again, if you take Kelce as the first tight end off the board, I wouldn't fault you. I just think that, there were signs there that he was slowing down, maybe just in terms of, just picking up more injuries, maybe not being able to play through as much as he was when he was younger. But he is right there with Sam Laporta. But I think it's safe to say that it's clearly, these 2 tight ends and then a pretty big teardrop. So once these 2 tight ends are off the board, there should be, a round or 2 before the next one's off the board. So if you really want to get, elite tight end, I think it's going to be one of these 2 guys. And I think either one could be first tight end off the board. And I think the best spot to be in is getting the second tight end off the board. So whichever one of these fall to you second, I think is probably where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, absolutely. Those 2 guys are I think in a tier of their own. And that's because once you start to get to this 3 to 6 range, there are different, pros and cons and things you could poke, holes you could kind of poke. And it's starting with this guy, Trey McBride, who was just a revelation for the Arizona Cardinals in the second half of the year in his second year as a pro. So without Kyler Murray, his first 9 games, he averaged 4.4 targets, 3.1 catches, 32 yards, and just 0.11 touchdowns per game. And then once Kyler came back, 8 games with Kyler, 8.3 targets, 6.6 catches, 67 yards per game. So it more than doubled his per game yardage and 0.25 touchdowns, 14.9 PPR points, 11.9 and half PPR compared to 7 and 5.4. So everything pretty much more than doubled when Kyler came back last year. But my question to you, Sean, is, how much of that was they just need, like, Kyler was a functional quarterback and they needed a number 1 target, versus this year, the big change is that Marvin Harrison, who, we'll talk about in our first receiver pod, he's going off the board as a top 12, wide receiver 1 in a lot of drafts. So, I mean, if Marvin Harrison's going to play as well as the market thinks he is, can Trey McBride still kind of put up similar numbers to last year? And is he the deserving tight end 3, or does Harrison kind of change that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Harrison definitely changes that a little bit. And going back to your Kyler on-off split, I think part of that is also Zach Ertz on-off. And it's, my comp for McBride entering the league was Dallas Goedert. So it was ironic for him to back up, Zach Ertz for the first season and a half in the NFL, which was annoying. I was complaining about that. And then, after Zach Ertz, he went down in week 7 with what turned out to be a season-ending injury. That's when McBride stepped up, along with, Kyler Murray returning under center. And he averages 6 points per game from week 8 on. So I think, he should be inside the top 5. But as you mentioned, they're bringing in Marvin Harrison Jr., a generational talent at wide receiver. He's absolutely going to command, high target share. So that's going to eat into McBride quite a bit. So I think tight end 3, I can't fault you for taking him at tight end 3, but so many other guys that are being taken, 4 to 5 picks after him, you could argue should be tight end 3. I think it's a bit of a reach just taking anybody at the top of this tier. So I think for McBride, tight end 3 is a little bit high for me, just considering, he does have that added competition with Marvin Harrison Jr. But again, he has the upside. He's entering year 3, entering his prime. We have yet to see the best version of Trey McBride. So I can't fault you, but I think this is still a slight reach for me.
Yeah, and I think the reason is because the next 2 guys we'll talk about have a legit chance to be their team's number 1 target. I think they would kind of expect them to be almost entering the year. And that first guy is Mark Andrews, who goes off as a tight end 4 in a lot of spots, tight end 5 in others. But, how when it comes to, McBride versus a guy like Andrews, yes, there's a Zay Flowers there in Baltimore, but you kind of expect Andrews to have a better shot at being, or going toe-to-toe with Flowers for that number 1 spot in terms of targets on that Raven offense, which you always like for a tight end. So Andrews is a little bit older. He's going into his age 29 season. He has missed some time. So how are you viewing Mark Andrews' value this 2024 season?
Yeah, so last year, unfortunately, he missed 7 games with that leg injury, but should be 100% going into this year, so that's not a concern. He, he was tied for 4th in best ball points added per game last year, so he's still up there with, elite company. And I think of these tight ends, vying for the tight end 3 slot, he still has, the best track record. He's still, I would say, is at the tail end of his prime. He's 29, so not really expecting him to drop off this year or anything. So he's, my tight end 3 as of now. But as I was saying, you can make a case for 4 or 5 of these tight ends here. But I just think based on, his track record, where he is in his career, like you said, Zay Flowers is, some pretty good target competition for him. He's still potentially Lamar's number 1 target, especially in the red zone. So I still consider him, part of that elite top 3. But again, there's still a pretty big drop off after Laporta and Kelce now. So it's not as close as it used to be. But he's my tight end 3 barely right now.
Yeah, and last year, Flowers 6.8 targets per game, Andrews 6.1. But if Andrews were healthier, for a bit more, probably would have been about equal for both of them, both somewhere in the mid 6s. So, he's got a shot at doing that, but he is a little bit older. And then Dalton Kincaid is the guy that I think makes this all very interesting because on one hand, I think he has tight end 1 overall upside, like right there with Kelce and Laporta. He should enter the year projected to be the Bills' number 1 target because you had Stephon Diggs leave, you had Gabe Davis leave. That's over 240 targets, vacated 1,900 receiving yards, 15 scores. So Kincaid, especially given the draft capital they spent, you would think he'll be that number 1 guy competing with Coleman and Shakir and Samuel and MVS and Hollins at wide receiver. The only thing is, we are still hearing that Dawson Knox, the other tight end, is still going to be involved. And, similar to, we had this conversation with Jahmyr Gibbs on our running back pod. Check that out if you haven't. But it was like, okay, once the playoffs hit and Montgomery was healthy, Gibbs workload didn't continue to go up as like a preview of what's to come in year 2. Like it kind of leveled out. And the same thing pretty much happened for Kincaid. Knox missed some games down the stretch and Kincaid was balling out. And then when Knox came back, Knox kind of came back to his same role and Kincaid wasn't just on the field, 80-90% of the time. So what are you thinking in terms of his snap count? Because I think that's really what would kind of hold him back. But he also has that upside of like a George Kittle year too, where Kittle was like the target hog for San Francisco and put up nearly 1,400 yards in his second year. So where are you on Kincaid?
Yeah, so I mean, he was really interesting. Rookie last year, had a bit of a mixed bag, and it wasn't too surprising. We kind of thought it'd be kind of murky with Dawson Knox in the picture. So weeks 1 through 5, when Dawson Knox was healthy, Kincaid only ran a route on 68% of Josh Allen's dropbacks, which was definitely concerning. And also, he had really low ADOT at 3.6. Mm-hmm. So he was the tight end 33 over that stretch, and then it was weeks 8 through 12 when Knox was out. That's when Kincaid broke out. He was 5th in points per game over that stretch. Then we get to see them both, on the field weeks 14 through 18. And Kincaid, he dropped back down to like 21st in points per game. Mm-hmm. But the underlying usage was much more promising, and that's what I think we can expect heading into this year. I agree with you. I think he has tight end 1 overall upside. I think that might require Dawson Knox to miss quite a bit of time to hit that, but that's certainly possible. But I think with Diggs and Gabe Davis both gone, it's just unclear how this wide receiver room is going to shape out. So Kincaid could be the Travis Kelce role in this offense, where he's the number 1 target, and all the collection of receivers, they have different skill sets. They kind of have their own role, but Kincaid is the alpha receiver in this offense. So yeah, he has a ton of upside. I would like to see him, be more of a target in the red zone, and see that touchdown, go up. That's kind of where I think Diggs' departure kind of helps Kincaid in terms of touchdown upside. So I could see, taking him in the top 5 this year, because I think he does, like you said, have that top 1 overall touchdown tight end upside.
Yeah, I mean that's what I struggle with, because it's like the floor versus the ceiling, because I think when you look at McBride and what he did last year with, no Ertz or with Kyler, whatever you want to call it, I feel like McBride doesn't necessarily have that upside this year because Harrison is there, whereas Kincaid now has that upside because Diggs and Davis are gone. So yeah, from that perspective, I guess it's how much lower is the floor for Kincaid versus like a McBride or a Andrews, if Knox continues to play at the level he does. That's kind of what I go back and forth with, but I may end up having Kincaid ranked tight end 3, just because he's of Andrews, McBride, and himself, like he's the only guy that really has that George Kittle year 2, like I'm the alpha target. I'm the only target here. I might get 140, 150 targets. I might put up 1,400 yards. Like I just don't know if either of these other teams really need Andrews and McBride to do that. So and I don't know if the floor is low, like the difference in floors between the 3 is low enough to really knock Kincaid down that much. So I'm kind of liking him as a tight end 3, even though it is concerning a little bit what happened with Knox and the fact that he didn't he wasn't just playing 100 like or close to a full-time role anytime Knox was there.
Yeah, what do you right now I have his routes run projection right around 85. Even when Knox is healthy, do you have that projection yet, or are you around?
Yeah,
there?
Hold on. I think I would actually have it a little lower. It's still conservative.
Oh,
Let's see.
yeah.
Yeah, I have it at 80. So yeah, that's pretty aggressive too. But yeah, I think it was more in like the 70s last year. He ended up with 74%, even with Knox playing 12 games. So I guess there's room to grow on that. I think 80, 85. 85. I would, if he does 85, I would really that would be
that's amazing. Tight end 3. Yeah, that's tight end 3.
Because right now he's sitting at tight end 4 for me. But yeah, if I bump that to 85 or even 82.5, I think he would end up tight end 3. But just from the range of outcomes that I'm looking at, I think he's going to end as my tight end 3. He's the guy really excited to draft this year. Just because I think he has that tail of his up like high end outcomes is a little longer. So all right, Kyle Pitts is a polarizing tight end. Always been a little bit disappointing. I guess my question is, he's a tight end 6 now. Evan Engram, George Kittle are guys that, Engram, both of them have been very productive over the last few years, probably in, you could argue we're in better offenses now. If Cousins hits, I mean, Pitts should be in a great offense too, but, how worried would you be with the floor for Pitts at tight end 6 versus like a Kittle or Engram, guys that are a little more kind of know what we're going to get? And how do you just see Pitt's role changing in this new offense? Because, I mean, I guess he was always with Arthur Smith, which, he had Jonnu Smith factoring in a lot more than maybe we expected. So what are you thinking with Pitts this year?
I think he is absolutely in the discussion for tight end 3. He's my tight end 4. But I agree. He probably has the lowest floor out of all these guys we're talking about. So, yeah, maybe the widest range of outcomes. And, 3 seasons in, he has failed to live up to his hype. But I think he's been held back due to, poor quarterback play, the scheme, and injuries so far. So all of that could change this year under the new coaching regime. And more importantly, just having a viable quarterback like Kirk Cousins under center. So he's still only going to be 24 this season. We have to remember Travis Kelce didn't even catch his first NFL pass until he was 25. So Pitts is still very young and still entering his prime. So I don't think I've ever really been high on Pitts. I was always pretty cautious with them, but I think this is a year I might be a little bit ahead of ADP. Again, I have him tight end 4, so I think now is the time to invest in him. And, he has tight end 1 overall upside too if everything clicks in Atlanta. So he's one of those guys where I'd be willing to roll the dice. I still think he has a pretty solid floor, but I would agree that out of all the guys we're discussing about, tight ends 3 through 8, he might have the widest range of outcomes. But I think at tight end 6, he's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think 6 or 7. I just the only guy I really don't want to take him over is a guy like Kincaid, because I feel like both of those guys, there's like some projection involved, but again, it's like Pitts. I think Pitts has more competition for targets just with Drake London there and Bijan there, but he could definitely be like the next Hawkinson in that offense. So I think he's a little safer this year, and I think the ceiling is probably even higher without these Arthur Smith shenanigans going on.
Yeah.
All right. Before we move on to tight end 7 through 12, just wanted to pause really quick to talk about FantasyLabs.com. FantasyLabs.com is where all of our season-long fantasy football content will live this season. It has all of our rankings, which we update all the time, and it's everything's downloadable. We'll have our start-sit info there during the regular season once games kick off. All of our award-winning analysis and content can be found over at FantasyLabs.com. And right now, you can get $20 off by using the promo code FLEX20. That's FLEX20 at FantasyLabs.com/flex. That's $20 off at FantasyLabs.com/flex with the promo code FLEX20. Visit FantasyLabs.com/flex to take advantage now. All right. Evan Engram is the tight end 7. 143 targets last year, 114 catches, kind of went under the radar a little bit because he only averaged 8.4 yards per catch, only caught 4 touchdowns, but the volume was there. He is entering his age 30 season. How much of that volume you think repeats from last year?
I think the volume is definitely bankable, and he's a very safe play. He was very much a high floor, lower ceiling player last year. He finished inside the top 24 tight ends 94% of the time last year, which led the position. So a very high floor. But he only finished in the top 12 just 13% of the time. That ranked tied for 18th. And that's kind of what you were talking about. He averaged just 8.4 yards per catch, only scored 4 touchdowns. Both of those figures, he could see some positive regression and be even better this year and have more of a, weekly ceiling. But I think we can expect, roughly a similar type of role, similar type of numbers this year. Just really steady production. That's probably better for, season long head-to-head full PPR formats. So he's my tight end 8. In best ball, we'll talk about him next, but in best ball, I much rather have George Kittle, and maybe in season long head-to-head formats, I'd rather have Evan Engram. So I think when you're debating between these two guys, it really comes down to which format you're drafting in.
Yeah, Kittle's a little more unpredictable, but he does have that high ceiling, can score multiple touchdowns in a game, put up 100-yard plus games. So yeah, Kittle, tight end 8. Last year, I mean, he pretty much outproduced Debo in catches per game and yards per game. He had 4.1 for 64, Debo 4.0 for 60, and with one fewer touchdown. So I think he also becomes massively intriguing if something goes on with Ayuk or anything like that. But yeah, you're essentially looking at Kittle as more of a best ball half PPR guy, and then Engram is the full.
Yeah. Kittle is a really good best ball type of option. He finished in the top 24 just 63% of the time. That ranked 19th last year, but finished top 12 44% of the time, which led the position. And he was third in best ball points added per game. So he's the type of tight end. He just has a wide range of outcomes every week, just due to this 49ers offense having so many different weapons, being very efficient, but they do have a lower volume. So it seems like one or two of those guys every week is left holding the bag. So he's a little bit tougher in season long head-to-head formats, trying to figure out when he's going to have those weeks. Whereas best ball, you don't care. You just take the spike weeks when they come. And I think he has some sneaky upside at ADP right now, considering I guess there's still a slight chance Brandon Ayuk gets traded away. That would certainly raise Kittle's weekly floor, and he would still have the massive ceiling. So I think right now, if you can get Kittle tight end 8, really in any format, I think he's definitely worth it, because again, there is a chance Ayuk gets traded away, and that would only bump up Kittle in my projections.
Yeah, I like Kittle down here. You know, 7 other tight ends off the board, and you can get Kittle. It's pretty good value. Tight end 9 is Jake Ferguson. Had a really good year too for the Cowboys. 102 targets, 71 catches, 761 yards, 5 touchdowns in his age 24 season. Now, Cowboys looks like there's going to be a downgrade to the run game with Pollard gone, and the O-line as well. There could be there's some new faces there. And Michael Gallup is gone as well. So, all in all, I think could probably see this passing game rely on Ferguson even more than it did last year. But what do you think for Ferguson entering year 3?
Yeah, he's definitely a top 10 type of guy. And if you remember the first handful of games last season, we were trying to figure out, along with the Cowboys, who was going to replace Dalton Schultz in this offense. So they, Ferguson certainly led a 3-way committee with Peyton Hendershot, Luke Schoonmaker. It wasn't really until after the Week 7 bye that he really did take over as the clear lead tight end, average an 81% routes run rate from Week 8 on. I think that best represents what to expect this year. And he was 8th in points per game from that stretch on. So I think that's absolutely what we can, project for him this year. Should only get better. Now he has the full offseason, knowing he's the top tight end, probably just going to be even better in year 3. So I agree. I think this Cowboys offense could be even more reliant on the passing game, and with defenses, maybe double teaming Lamb, that could just open up Ferguson even more. So yeah, I have him right here at tight end 9. I really think, Ferguson and Njoku are kind of like the mini tier. Once these two guys are off the board, I think this position really opens up. So I think these next 2 tight ends are your last chance to really grab, a tight end 1, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Ferguson shouldn't forget either that, he's only 25 this year, and he caught 3 touchdowns on 10 receptions in that playoff loss to Green Bay. So even though he had 5 on 71 during the regular season, his touchdown upside is probably a little bit higher than his regular season numbers give him credit for as well. So he's a guy who probably is gonna just be the new Dalton Schultz. Just be a big part of that Cowboy offense. And there's not, Brandon Cooks is a little bit older. Tolbert is unestablished, and now they don't really have a go-to pass catcher the same way they might have had with Pollard. So I think Ferguson's arrow is pointing up, and the reason I like him more than a guy like Njoku is just because Njoku, you also have to question, like, was it Flacco, and can he do the same thing with Watson? Whereas Ferguson, was obviously Dak all year. But let's talk about Njoku. So with Joe Flacco, he played 5 games, averaged 9 targets, 6 catches, 78 yards, and had 4 touchdowns in those 5 games. And then everyone else, which there were some, it wasn't just Deshaun, but some other not as good as Deshaun starting quarterbacks, but overall 7 targets, 4.6 catches, 45 yards per game, and just 0.18 touchdowns per game, a drop off of over 8 PPR points, and over 7. Over 8 of half and full PPR points compared to Flacco. So, what is the real Njoku? I guess for this year is my question.
Yeah, who the hell knows? But I think you hit the nail on the head. The fact that you have to ask that means you should probably draft Ferguson ahead of him, because there's really no question there. We know he's probably going to be the number 2 target in that offense. Whereas Njoku, when you're talking about that final 5-game stretch, I mean, it's one of those things where we talk about the watching the player absolutely matches up with the numbers. When you're watching him, he looked like the best tight end in the league. Like, he looked legit. We've known he has that sort of upside. Unfortunately, it was Joe Flacco that unlocked that. And like you said, with the 5 games of Deshaun Watson, he only averaged 1.7 best ball points added per game. That would have ranked 22nd. So you just have to figure maybe it's somewhere in the middle there, maybe closer to his floor. Who knows? But that does give me some pause taking him inside the top 9. But Jerry Jeudy might ding his target share slightly. So unfortunately, it does depend on if you think Deshaun Watson can even remotely return to the form we saw with the Texans. And as we talked about, I don't even know if that's possible at this point. Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, you have to ding Njoku, not for him per se, but because of Deshaun Watson. So that's why I think tight end 10 makes sense. It'd be hard to take, a guy like Brock Bowers ahead of him. We'll talk about him in a second. But I think Njoku should be, the tight end 10, but I'd much rather have someone like Ferguson because there's a little bit more certainty there.
Yeah, I think, the floor is just lower with Njoku than Ferguson, even if maybe the median and ceilings are similar. And then it kind of, like you said, all bets are off once you get to tight end 11. Brock Bowers, obviously uber talented guy, went in the first half of the first round. But, there are some knocks. He is a rookie, and that doesn't mean as much anymore with the way, teams are just kind of using these move tight ends in the passing game. But there's also an alpha wide receiver 1 there for now in Davante Adams, another highly drafted tight end there in Michael Mayer, who's only, from the year before. And then one of the worst quarterback situations in the league with O'Connell and Minshew. Pierce likely wants to, or not likely, he wants to be a run heavy kind of defensive minded team. So, given all that, what are we really like? How is Bowers? Because some people might not even be that familiar with him. How is he getting this tight end 11 spot in ADP? And do you think he should be going there? There's a case for other guys.
Yeah, he's being drafted tight end 11 because of just his raw potential. He is one of the top tight end prospects we've ever seen, possibly since Kyle Pitts. And he just has massive upside. He could easily become a top 5 tight end in the league as soon as his rookie season. I think last season with, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, really just hitting the ground running as rookies. We've seen these talented rookies not see the sluggish start we're kind of used to seeing when it comes to, college tight ends converting to the NFL. A lot of these guys are just excellent pass catchers and they just hit the ground running. That's going to be Brock Bowers. But I didn't love the landing spot. As you mentioned, under Pierce, this could be a much more run-heavy, defensive-minded Raiders team. They already had an up-and-coming tight end in Michael Mayer, so I don't know how that's going to work out necessarily. They already have an alpha wide receiver in Davante Adams. Even Jacoby Myers really does command a pretty high target share, and this is, one of the worst quarterback situations in the league with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. So while I love Bowers as a talent, and I get why he's tight end 11. I still think there's quite a bit of drop off from even tight end 10 to 11. So I usually like to have a tight end before, we get to this part of the draft. But maybe he'll have a Dalton Kincaid type season if, Davante Adams or Jacoby Myers or Michael Mayer misses time or something like that. But I think if everyone's healthy, if this situation is what I think it'll be, I think that's going to hurt him in the long run. But down the road, it would not shock me if he does turn into a top 5 annually, fantasy tight end.
Yeah. He might be a year away, but we already mentioned it. You kind of, after the top 10 guys, you're kind of taking a flyer here a little bit. So if you're looking for the ceiling instead of the floor, I can't blame you. But I think the floor version of it would, or not the floor version of him, but the floor play in this range would be Dallas Goedert at tight end 12. He's a more of a high floor, low ceiling guy. Crazy, in 6 years, he never has cracked 60 receptions, and he's never had more than 5 touchdowns. So that's kind of crazy to think
I blame
about.
Zach Ertz for some of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because Goddard's always in the mix of, this tight end 1 mix. So it's kind of crazy to think that he never put up, had a season with better numbers. You have Brown, you have Smith, and then you have Hurts scrambling. I think all of those things kind of cap his ceiling a little bit. But you do have the lack of a number 3 wide receiver. I mean, I think it's Paris Campbell right now. That kind of keeps his floor intact. He would obviously benefit, I think, from some touchdown luck, given that his career high is 5, or some injury luck. Brown, Smith been pretty healthy over the last couple of years. So, overall, how do you look at Goedert, and do you think there's a case for taking him over a guy like Bowers?
Yeah, so, Goddard's essentially Evan Engram, but with a little bit less bankable volume. So he's going to give you fairly steady production week to week, but only average 10 yards a catch, only scored 3 touchdowns. And you just have to wonder if, the Eagles just being so successful at the tush push, especially near the goal line, is part of why his touchdown upside is limited. And it's hard to see that really seeing too much positive regression. But I think this is right about the time you should take him. I think I'd rather take a flyer on Bowers' upside. Bowers still has more upside than Goedert, I think. So I would still lean Bowers. But Goedert, again, he's going to provide you that steady weekly floor. So he's more of a solid play in season-long head-to-head formats. PPR, he's maybe a little less valuable. But again, he's after him, I would say, depending on how many games you think TJ Hawkinson's going to play this year, I think there's another, slight drop-off once Goddard's off the board. So I do think, Bowers and Goedert are sort of their mini tier, maybe with Hawkinson in there. So I think it is important if you missed out on a tight end in the first 10 to maybe take one of these guys, because this position does take a slight dip and then it's wide open. I think you have 10 to 12 viable tight ends after this that you can make a case for. But I do like, Goedert when he goes to, the tight end 12 slot.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing with, his raw volume numbers, he does stand to benefit from Kellen Moore's potential increased pace. Moore, he's been a top 5 in pace every year. So now he's with the Eagles. So something as simple as that, could kind of help out Goedert. So yeah, I think season long, I probably like him ahead of Bowers, just because, I mean, Bowers could have a Michael Mayer like season as well, for all, that's in his range of outcomes, where I think there is more of a floor. So I think best ball is where I really want Bowers. But then the problem with that is you're not really trying to stack either of those Raider quarterbacks.
Which one do you stack him?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. So it's Bowers probably just on his, compared to his actual range of outcomes, he's probably a little bit overvalued, but the ceiling is there. Whereas Goedert, you kind of know what you're getting there. So yeah, it's tough. But yeah, I think the more risk I want to take on, that's where I'll take a guy like Bowers. But if I just need to, I just have a really good team and I just need a high floor tight end, I'd probably go Goedert. Okay, let's look at guys real quick outside the top 12. If you miss out on those guys, and you mentioned you don't even really want to miss out on the top 9 or 10, but if you do, who's the guy outside that top 12 that you're targeting?
Yeah, I think this is a range where every year there's 2 or 3 league winners. So a couple of guys like in that tight end 20 range, I like to have like really good upside to be Cade Otton. He sees a ton of playing time, around 90% routes run rate, but his upside was capped last year because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin played, all 17 games. So if either one of those guys were to have you miss any time, Otton's going to get a boost and become, a top 2 target in this offense. So I think he's priced about right at tight end 21, but has a higher ceiling than other guys in this range. I think you could say the same thing about Tyler Conklin, where he didn't score a single touchdown last year, but that'll change with Aaron Rodgers under center. So he has some sneaky touchdown upside there. I think way later on, the last guy I want to talk about is Mike Gesicki. Around tight end 29, I think he is a decent flyer because he's bounced around the past couple years. He wasn't a good fit in the McDaniels offense in Miami, so he was shipped to New England, played behind Hunter Henry. That wasn't a good fit at all. But I think he has upside in the Bengals offense, especially with Tyler Boyd gone. There's an open competition right now for the number 3 wide receiver role, but that could actually be Gesicki in this offense. So anytime you could potentially get Joe Burrow's number 3 target, I think it's worth a flyer. And I think tight end 29, Gesicki, he's still one of the better pass catching tight ends. He has some upside. I think in that range, I definitely think he's worth a flyer in best ball.
Yeah, he is intriguing just like for free in best ball, especially if you're building up Burrow stacks anyway. I like another guy if I agree, I don't want to miss out on the tight end 1 tier, but Dalton Schultz actually is pretty interesting to me because he's still only 28, so he's still in his prime. He's attached to an elite quarterback, and he could actually benefit from all the attention Dell, Collins, Stephon Diggs draw, because at this range you're kind of going a little bit touchdown chasing. You're not expecting anyone here to get massive volume. So I think in terms of touchdown upside, being attached to CJ Stroud, playing a ton of games indoors, his route participation rate was around 73% last year, which is pretty good, pretty on the high end of tight end. So I don't mind some Dalton Schultz. I know people are going to kind of be scared off because Dell is going to be healthy. Diggs is there, but I think that could actually help him compared to, other guys in this range, which the quarterback situation is usually not nearly as good.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you're trying to project the Texans receivers, it is tricky trying to figure out how this is going to sort out with Diggs, Nico, Tank Dell. But when it comes to tight end, we know that Dalton Schultz is going to be right around 85% routes run rate. So he does have that stability and, a cheap way to invest in this Texans passing attack.
And our guy David, our producer D Payne, he also wants to know about Taysom. Taysom, I think, is always kind of an interesting one. He's going around tight end 18 right now. Do you think he has, or what do you think his value is going to be this season? What's changed in New Orleans from last year, and how are you kind of projecting him going forward?
Yeah, I think he's always worth a flyer in that range, just given his massive upside. Last year he finishes the tight end 12. However, I think most of his value, I think, comes from when he's a runner, especially near the goal line. I think when they line him up as a true tight end, his value does take a hit. So with him, we'll kind of have to monitor Juwan Johnson's status. He is dealing with a knee injury. I think he had like a knee scope. Yep. So his week one status might be in doubt. So if they have to use Taysom as more of a traditional tight end, I think that might ding him. So that's something worth monitoring. But yeah, I don't know. Like, do you know how they intend to use Taysom this year? Is it going to be more of the same, or are they going to start to dial it back with him?
That I think there's a definitely a bigger risk that they dial it back with him, only because you had, Peyton and Carmichael. Peyton was the coach, Carmichael was the OC for a number of years. Then Peyton moves on, but Carmichael's still there. Now they also got rid of Carmichael. So they got a new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak. So you're going to have a different scheme change. Kubiak is not necessarily married to Taysom or anything like that the way, the other guys were. So there is some downside, but at the same time, if Taysom is the number 1 tight end at least the number 1 receiving tight end because of Johnson's absence, at least to start the year, that's also intriguing. So I would say, I think, the ceiling is similar, but the floor is probably even lower for Hill, but that doesn't really matter at tight end 18. So yeah, I would, especially with Johnson's status in doubt, I would take some flyers on him because he's one of the few guys I think that has, outside the top 10 that really has that league winning upside. And it's already kind of obvious. It's not like, oh man, you have to really like squint to see it. Like we've seen it with him. So yeah, I think he's worth some flyers, but just keep in mind that the fact that Carmichael's gone, you also could have a lot different role.
And best ball specifically, have you gotten good at like trying to predict when he's going to go off, or is it a crapshoot every week? I think it's a crapshoot.
It's a crapshoot, especially now it's because because you have none of the same regime. I think it could change, but yeah, I think it's usually when he's had like a couple of quiet games is when you'd expect him to go off last year. And then when he had a good game, then it was like the next week they would kind of let the defense plan for it and nothing would happen.
Yeah.
So he is kind of a best ball pick, but then how much Derek Carr are you really stacking? So yeah, it's a weird situation. You're not going to have him on too many teams, but I do think the upside, especially with Johnson's health in doubt, I think he is worth some flyers, but just keep in mind that there's a new regime and it could get really ugly for him at the same time. All right, that is going to wrap it up for our top fantasy tight ends episode here on the Fantasy Flex. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss any episodes. We'll do wide receivers next. We have quarterbacks out already, as well as a bunch of other content. So be sure to subscribe. Be sure to check out fantasylabs.com for all of our fantasy football rankings, content, and all that good stuff. You can find Sean on Twitter. X, whatever you're calling it these days, at the _oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon. We're at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.